So let's set the scene. It's the early morning of January 3rd, 2026, and the world wakes up to some absolutely stunning news. The United States has launched a major military operation inside Venezuela, and they've captured its president, Nicolás Maduro. So today, we're going to break down exactly how this unprecedented event happened, why the U.S. says they did it, and unpack the huge political and legal questions this whole thing raises.
And the official word? It came straight from President Trump in a social media post. No ambiguity there. He declared the mission a huge success. You can imagine, that one single post just kicked off a day of non-stop dramatic developments, sending shockwaves all the way from Caracas to Washington. Okay, so how in the world did a secret, overnight mission actually manage to capture the head of a sovereign nation? Well, when you look at the tactical details, you see a plan that was incredibly complex and, frankly, unbelievably precise.
The mission had a code name, of course, Operation Absolute Resolve, and the objective was as audacious as it gets: find and apprehend Nicolás Maduro. The unit tasked with this, incredibly high-stakes operation was a joint force of the best of the best. Delta Force, the Army's top special mission unit, working right alongside the FBI.
The sheer scale and precision here are just staggering. I mean, listen to this. According to the Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Dan Kane, we're talking about over 150 aircrafts launching from 20 different bases, all to create this perfect window of opportunity. First, they just completely took apart Venezuela's air defenses. Then, stealth helicopters flew in super low, just 100 feet over the water, to maintain what he called totally the element of surprise, right up until the moment those forces breached the compound and arrested Maduro.
And here's a wild piece of trivia for you. This all went down exactly 36 years to the day after the U.S. arrested another Latin American leader on very similar charges, Panama's Manuel Noriega. What are the odds?
So what was the official reason for such an extreme, action? The Trump administration was crystal clear on this. They said this is not an act of war. Instead, they framed the whole thing as a massive law enforcement operation, basically designed to bring an indicted fugitive to justice.
And this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. For years, the U.S. has had a bounty on Maduro's head, and that figure was recently doubled to a whopping $50 million. That's a pretty clear signal they were escalating the effort to bring him in.
The entire legal argument here really hinges on this one very powerful charge: narco-terrorism. The indictment from 2020 claims this wasn't just about making money. No, prosecutors allege that Maduro's regime very deliberately deployed cocaine as a weapon with the specific goal of harming the United States.
And after his capture, they unsealed a superseding indictment that gets even more specific. It accuses Maduro of not just leading this Cartel de los Soles drug cartel, but also of actively partnering with FARC, which is a designated terrorist group, all with the shared goal of flooding the U.S. with cocaine.
Attorney General Pam Bondi really hammered this point home. She promised that Maduro would face justice right here on American soil. And that message was so key to their public framing of this. Maduro wasn't a head of state they were deposing, he was a wanted criminal, and this was just them finally serving a long-standing arrest warrant.
Okay, but with Maduro now in U.S. custody, what was the plan for Venezuela itself? Well, President Trump's answer to that question immediately sparked a whole new firestorm.
In a press conference, the president was just incredibly blunt about it. He announced that the U.S. would, and I quote, run the country for a while to manage the transition. And he explicitly tied this to Venezuela's massive oil reserves, saying a key goal was to get the oil flowing again. Now, while the administration was trying to project this image of a nice, smooth transition, even claiming that Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was cooperating, the reality on the ground in Caracas was total chaos. Rodriguez immediately went on TV, called Maduro the only president, and labeled his capture a barbaric kidnapping. So, two very different stories there. Back here in the States, the reaction was immediate and, deeply divided. But the really interesting thing is that the battle lines weren't drawn along traditional party lines at all. Things got complicated. Inside the administration, the tone was, triumphant. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's blunt assessment of Maduro pretty much summed up their entire view. He praised the mission as a full-on display of American leadership.
Democrats, on the other hand, launched an immediate legal challenge. Senator Tim Kaine, who's been a longtime advocate for congressional oversight, was unequivocal. He just flat-out called it an illegal war, arguing the president acted completely without constitutional authority from Congress.
So the debate in Washington really boiled down to this crucial question of presidential power.
As you can see here, you had supporters like Secretary Rubio defending the secrecy, saying, hey, this was a law enforcement mission, we couldn't risk leaks. But then you had opponents, including key Republicans like Senator Collins, who basically said, I don't care what you call it. An action this big requires Congress to be involved, and the fact that you didn't brief us is a really serious problem.
And that's the thing. This was not a simple partisan fight. You had prominent Republicans also coming out with strong criticism. Representative Brian Fitzpatrick rejected the whole idea of the U.S. running another country. Others, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, they questioned the administration's real motive, suggesting this was way more about oil and regime change than it ever was about drug trafficking.
And beyond the Americas, the shockwaves from this operation triggered a huge wave of international condemnation and, a lot of concern.
The reaction from around the world was fast, and it was overwhelmingly negative. Really, outside of Maduro's political opponents inside Venezuela, who were obviously celebrating, the global consensus was pretty clear. Major nations either flat out condemned the action as a violation of sovereignty or expressed really grave concerns and called for restraint.
The United Nations was not mincing words. The Secretary General said they were deeply alarmed, calling the whole thing a dangerous precedent. They also stated that the basic rules of international law may not have been respected here. And Venezuela's allies, Russia, Iran, and Cuba, they were even more forceful. They immediately condemned the U.S. operation, using terms like criminal attack and act of armed aggression.
Which, of course, leaves us with the final, absolutely critical question. The military part is over, but the political fallout, it's just getting started. You've got Washington divided, the international community is furious, and a defiant government is still in place in Caracas. So the path forward for a U.S.-run Venezuela is, well, anything but clear.